Hi everyone, I thought today we'd have a go at a nice cockerel, something we've not done before. So what I've done is drawn the cockerel out. So if you start with an ellipse, the head section, focus on getting the shape of the neck. You can do a circle here to get the shape of the body. Then come out with the feathers of the tail and the feet and claws. Then you can come back to the face and get the shape all around here and the head and the beak and the eye. Okay, colours wise, I've mixed up 5 colours. So I've got raw sienna. These have all got a little bit of water in and they're fairly strong colours. Burnt sienna, cadmium red deep or Windsor red. This is indigo, and then I've got a mixture of gamboge yellow, any yellow will do, with intense blue or a phthalo blue or Windsor blue. They will all work to make a really nice dark bluey green. If you haven't got any of those colours, then feel free to improvise and use what you've got because it will still work. Okay, so I'm trying today without the tripod so that I can give you a better angle. So the first thing I'm going to do is wet over the cockerel and a bit further, so you don't have to wet everywhere, but I want the underpainting to spread a little bit. If you can avoid the eye, that's great. It's not essential, it just will mean that you preserve that white in the eye for later. So I've just left it dry around the eye. This is all nice and loose. So I've got my round number 10. I'm going to come in with some raw sienna first of all. So this is underpainting, so this is going to give a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of movement into that background. So I'm just randomly dabbing that on. A little bit of burnt sienna. Little bit of the red. It will flow. I don't want you to panic. This is all about creating something that's got a little bit more atmosphere and a little bit more loose. In fact, I'm purposely taking a few extra bits on. I'm going to come in with a little bit of the green. Still not panicking. It's exactly what I want to happen. And then I'm going to touch in with some of the indigo. As well. So I'm going to dry that one off and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so that's dried really nicely now. And what I'm going to do first of all is come into the legs and claws and just pop these in. So this is a round number 6 and a little bit of water. I'm going to drop some raw sienna in. And a little bit of burnt sienna. So I'm just dropping a little bit of burnt sienna in. And I can just splay that out with a damp brush towards the bottom as well. Come on to this leg. And similar again to the raw sienna. And a little bit of the burnt sienna just in there, and then a damp brush just to bring that out a little bit. I'm going to go up to the eye and a bit of the indigo. And just pop that in. So I'm going on to dry using my round number 6, and I want the tiniest little dot of light that I can get. The smaller the better. If you lose the light you can always pop a little bit in a bit later with a bit of acrylic. Again, quite nice if you can just pull out a little bit. So that's with just a damp brush in the corners, just like that. I'm going to continue building up. So I'm looking the photograph as I go, starting to pull out some of these sections. So there's little bits that are lighter and there's little bits that are darker. I'm coming on to dry, but with quite a loaded brush, so it gives me plenty of time. A loaded brush will mean it's not going to dry too quickly. A little crowning. You don't have to be too precise with this. So that little bit of light there, I'm going to try and save that so that I can soften that in. I'm going to use a little bit of indigo just in places to make sure that it's a bit darker. See, that's spreading, so that's just a damp brush I'm pulling in here, pulling down. It's not all too defined. And round. There's quite a pool of paint here, so I'm being very careful at this stage not to soften in too soon, otherwise I'll lose the softening in. I'll just clean my brush. So this is just a damp brush. I'm just bringing that through, so I keep that light there. Again, damp brush, bringing through to keep the light there, and then here as well. And here. If you lose any light, you can just keep lifting it back out. So if it is too wet, it might just disappear, and then you've got to keep lifting. And with a wet brush, I'm just going to touch in just in a few places here, so it starts to connect them together. And then because we're going loose as well, I'm just going to touch a bit of water in a few places at the top, because that will help it to spread and give it a bit more movement. It's quite nice to have a bit of movement. If you think any of those aren't flowing enough, you just add a little bit of water in there and they'll start to flow. That was a bit of the red paint. I'm going to pop a bit in here as well. A bit of the red paint. It started to flow there. Just a dab more of the indigo. Just where it's darker, I'm just going to dab a little bit in whilst it's wet. And then just run a damp brush just underneath the eye there, just to soften that in a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to dry those off. Okay, so we're coming back into this bit now. So I've got a little bit of the red with a tiny dab of indigo in there. So I'm getting more of a shadow colour. I'm just gonna pop in a couple of little bits of shadow, which is going to give a little bit more definition. Then I'll pick up a little bit of the raw sienna, just bring that over the beak so I can let that dry. I'm picking up my round number 10 now. I'm going to start to bring on some burnt sienna. And I want you to try and leave a few little gaps. So it'll work quite nicely to pick up little bits of light. So just follow strokes down. Don't be worried about being too precise with the picture. You're going for an impression of. I'm going to drop in a little bit of the red a bit further down here. Just odd little bits here and there. Drop down to a number 6. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of the indigo again, just coming round that bit. So So you're getting some darker bits of shadow in here. Okay, I'm gonna dry that one off. Okay, so that one's dried really lovely. So the next thing that we're going to start to do is to come on to the body. Again, we're just going to come straight on to dry. I want you to just start to pull out different areas. Be quite loose about it. So I'm starting with some burnt sienna. Dab in to a little bit of the red. Start to straight that through. There's some lovely colours in here. I'm going to swap down to a number 6. I'm going to start to dab in a little bit of the green. Now the green will be quite shooty because it's phthalo-pigment, but I want you to work with it. You'll have a nice sort of feathery effect. And red and green are complementary colours, so you can use this to start to create your shadow. If you can do this without drying this back, it'll work much better because the phthalo-pigment tends to fade with the hairdryer. So I'm going to try to avoid drying this off with the hairdryer. So a minute is looking like a very funky chicken. There's a little bit of indigo going in. Nice loose liberal strokes, lots of paint on here. That one I've rinsed, so I'm going to pick up a brush that's damp, just come in, just softening that area there. That bit there as well. So this is just a very damp brush rather than wet. I'm just pulling in some softness in places. Now I'm going to get a clean wet brush and just touch places to feather it out. So can you see what's happening there? So I'm touching with a wet brush and it'll start to splay and feather. And I'm going to take a little bit more paint in places. Then down here, I'm just going to touch in a few places. I want it to move, I want it to be a little bit messy. So indigo wise, I'm just taking and making sure I've got a little bit more in there, so I get that nice sort of feathering. Take a little bit more of the green in. The touch there, it'll just spread out a little bit. That's what I want it to do. And there. Maybe I'll touch there too. I'm going to pop a bit there. And then with a wet brush, just touch into that. It's all about creating that little bit of movement. So just down at the feet now, or claws, I'm just going to come around them a little bit. So this is a bit of the green. Just pulling the claws out just a little bit to define them a bit more. So that was the green on dry, and then I am touching the paint, wetting further than it needs to go. This is called softening in. It's just helping to define that at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to let that dry and I'll come back to do the finishing touches. Okay, so I've just popped a little bit of indigo here. I'm just going to soften that in, that little line, just so you get a bit more definition in the beak there. I've already started to come on and just create onto the dry a few more nice sharper lines for the tail, and there's just an odd little bit random dabs where you can see dark on the picture and you just want to bring them out just a little bit more. Those little random dabs, they work really nicely. And then what I want to do is just help to define a little bit more. So we've got this lovely background happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn upside down so I can show you this nice and easily. So if I come and bring in a little bit of a line here, this is the indigo, and maybe a little bit of a line there and there. Maybe just a tiny bit there, and then I'm going to rinse my brush, and with a wet brush I'm just going to touch the paint, but press the bust down so that I get a really nice softening in effect. This just helps to define areas. It's going to give it a little bit of a punch and shoot the cockerel out a little bit. If you struggle to soften in that way, then the other way to do it is to wet where you want the paint to go. Make sure your water's nice and clean, and wet a fairly wide area. Then you can pick up some paint and just drop it in. So if I do that bit, I'm going to show you this bit. You get that happening. Okay. I think I'm pretty much there. Hope you've enjoyed this one. See you next week.